The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another rut in the dusty trail, sending Amelia Ward's modest carpetbag sliding across the floor. She pressed a gloved hand against the wooden frame to steady herself, her other hand clutching the letter that had brought her to this forsaken corner of Wyoming territory. Through the grimy window, she caught her first glimpse of Cedar Falls, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the endless prairie like survivors of some terrible storm. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough as the landscape itself. "Watch your step now." Amelia gathered her belongings, 2 bags containing all her worldly possessions, including the precious books she'd brought for the school. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street, painting everything in shades of amber and dust. She stood there for a moment, taking in her new home, the general store with its sagging porch, the saloon already alive with raucous laughter, the small church with its crooked steeple pointing accusingly at the sky. "You, the new schoolmarm?" A woman's voice, soft but wary, drew her attention. Amelia turned to find a slight woman in a faded calico dress, her face prematurely lined by sun and worry. "Yes, I'm Miss Amelia Ward, from Philadelphia. Sarah Mitchell. I'm the pastor's wife." Sarah's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "We've been expecting you, though I should warn you, Cedar Falls ain't like Philadelphia." Before Amelia could respond, the saloon doors burst open and 3 men stumbled out, their laughter harsh as crow calls. The one in front, a massive man with a sheriff's star pinned crookedly to his vest, spotted them and changed course. "Well, well, the Eastern lady has arrived." His smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "Sheriff Luther Briggs, at your service. You'll want to pay your respects to Judge Crane soon as you're settled. He runs things here in Cedar Falls." Sarah's hand found Amelia's elbow, grip tightening imperceptibly. "The judge is very particular about how things are done here, Miss Ward." "I'm sure we'll get along splendidly," Amelia replied, keeping her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "I've come to teach children, nothing more." Sheriff Briggs laughed, a sound like gravel in a pan. "Teaching's one thing, teaching the right lessons is another. Judge Crane, he's got strong opinions about what belongs in young minds." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a modest building of unpainted wood that looked as if it had been abandoned for years. Weeds grew tall around the steps, and several windows were cracked. Sarah helped her carry her bags inside, where dust motes danced in the slanted light like tiny ghosts. "It needs work," Sarah said unnecessarily. "The last teacher," she didn't stay long. "What happened to her?" Sarah busied herself with opening windows. "She had ideas about teaching the Indian children alongside ours. Judge Crane didn't take kindly to that notion." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "The Lakota. They're not welcome here, not anymore." Amelia set down her carpetbag with a soft thud. "But surely the children are taught to fear and hate what their parents fear and hate." Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Judge Crane lost his son in a raid 15 years back, or so he says. Since then, he's made it his mission to ensure the Indians stay far from Cedar Falls." That evening, Amelia sat alone in the small room behind the schoolhouse that would serve as her home. By lamplight, she unpacked her books, readers, arithmetic texts, a precious atlas. Each one represented hope, a tool to open young minds. Through her window, she could see the lights of the saloon and hear the tinny notes of a poorly played piano. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, with sandy hair and suspicious eyes. "Ma'am, I'm Tom Bradley. My PA runs the smithy." He thrust a covered basket at her. "Ma sent this. Said you'd need supper." "That's very kind. Would you like to come in?" The boy shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. Pa says I shouldn't linger. Just wanted to say—" He glanced around nervously. "Be careful what you teach. Judge Crane's got ears everywhere." The next morning, Amelia rose early to prepare the schoolhouse. She swept years of dust from the floors, washed windows until they gleamed, and arranged the desks in neat rows. By the time the church bell rang 8 o'clock, she stood on the front steps, watching a handful of children approach with obvious reluctance. They ranged in age from 6 to 14, farmers' children mostly, with patched clothes and wary eyes. The boys clustered together, whispering and pointing. The girls hung back, clutching their lunch pails. "Good morning," Amelia called out, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned in Philadelphia's crowded classrooms. "I'm Miss Ward. Please come in and choose a desk." They filed in silently, taking seats as far from her desk as possible. She counted 12 students, fewer than she'd hoped, but a beginning nonetheless. "Now then," she began, moving to the chalkboard. "Let's start with names. When I call on you, please stand and tell me your name and age." One by one, they complied. Bradley, Morrison, Henderson, Quinn. Farm names, settler names. When she finished, young Mary Quinn raised a tentative hand. "Miss Ward, you ain't gonna teach us alongside no Indians, are you? Pa says they're savages who'd as soon scalp you as look at you." The room tensed, all eyes fixed on her. Amelia recognized this as her first test. "We'll focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic," she said carefully. "Everyone deserves education, but I understand your parents have concerns. We'll take things one day at a time." As the days passed, Amelia established a routine. Mornings for the younger children, afternoons for the older ones. She discovered that most could barely read. Their previous education sporadic at best. But they were hungry to learn, despite their initial wariness. It was during her second week that she first saw him, Judge Ellis Crane. He appeared in her doorway one afternoon like a storm cloud, filling the frame with his presence. Tall and lean, with silver hair and eyes like chips of winter ice, he surveyed her classroom with proprietary satisfaction. "Miss Ward, I apologize for not welcoming you sooner. The affairs of justice keep me occupied." His voice was cultured, at odds with his rough surroundings. "I trust you're settling in well." "Quite well, thank you." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "The children are eager learners." "Indeed, eager to learn the right lessons, I trust." He moved into the room, his boot heels clicking on the wooden floor. "You've heard, no doubt, about our difficulties with the local savages. I've heard there have been conflicts." His smile was thin as paper. "Conflicts. Yes, that's one word for it. Murder is another. Theft. Attacks on innocent settlers." He picked up one of her books, examining it with distaste. "I trust you won't fill their heads with romantic notions about noble savages. The Lakota are a plague upon this land, Miss Ward. They must be dealt with accordingly. I teach facts, Judge Crane, not opinions." "Facts." He set the book down with a deliberate care. "The fact is, Miss Ward, that Cedar Falls exists because strong men carved it from wilderness. Strong men who understood that civilization and savagery cannot coexist." His eyes found hers, cold and measuring. "I hope we understand each other." After he left, Amelia sank into her chair, hands trembling slightly. Sarah Mitchell's warnings echoed in her mind. Through her window, she could see Judge Crane crossing the street, townspeople stepping aside to let him pass. Like Moses parting the Red Sea, she thought, if Moses had been a tyrant. That night, unable to sleep, she sat at her small table writing letters by lamplight, one to her sister in Philadelphia, full of cheerful lies about her wonderful new position, another to her former colleague, more honest about the challenges she faced. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, their cries carrying across the empty plains like warnings. Cedar Falls might be small, isolated, a place where one man's hatred had poisoned the very air. But Amelia Ward had not traveled 2,000 miles to teach fear and prejudice. Whatever Judge Crane expected, whatever the town demanded, she would find a way to plant seeds of knowledge and compassion in the hard soil of the frontier, even if it cost her everything. The autumn morning carried a chill that cut through Amelia's wool shawl as she walked to the schoolhouse. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival in Cedar Falls, and she'd begun to understand the depth of poison that ran through the town's veins. It showed itself in small ways. Mothers pulling their children closer when Lakota traders passed through, men spitting in the dust and muttering curses, shopkeepers refusing to serve anyone with dark skin and braided hair. In her classroom that morning, young William Henderson raised his hand during geography lessons. "Miss Ward, why does the map show Indian territory? Pa says it won't be theirs much longer." "The treaties establish," Amelia began, but Mary Quinn interrupted. My uncle says treaties with savages ain't worth the paper they're written on. Says Judge Crane knows how to deal with them proper. The other children nodded agreement, their young faces already carved with inherited hatred. Amelia felt her heart sink. How could she teach compassion to children who nursed their parents' prejudices like heirloom seeds? "Let's return to our arithmetic," she said quietly. But the damage was done. The children whispered among themselves, sharing stories of Indian raids that grew more fantastical with each telling. After dismissing the class, Amelia found Sarah Mitchell waiting outside, a basket of mending in her arms. The pastor's wife had become her only real friend in Cedar Falls, though even Sarah seemed perpetually afraid of her own shadow. "Walk with me," Sarah said softly. "There are things you should know." They strolled toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to endless grassland. Sarah glanced around nervously before speaking. "Judge Crane wasn't always like this. 15 years ago, he was just another settler trying to make a life here. Then came the incident at Willow Creek. The raid where his son died." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "That's what he calls it. But my husband was here then, tending to the wounded. He says it wasn't a raid at all. A group of Lakota came to trade, peaceful as could be. But Crane's son, Jacob, he was drunk, got into an argument over a horse, started shooting." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The Lakota defended themselves. Jacob died, along with 2 other men who'd joined the fight, but Crane couldn't accept that his boy had started it. So he rewrote the story." Amelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. And the town believed him. He was already rich, already powerful. Who would challenge him? And once the lie took root, it grew. Every missing cow, every broken fence, blamed on the Lakota. Crane used fear to consolidate his power, and now... Sarah gestured helplessly. "Now the hate is real, even if the original cause was false." That afternoon, Amelia watched from her window as a small group of Lakota passed through town. 2 men, 3 women, and several children, their wagon loaded with buffalo hides for trade. The townspeople scattered like leaves before them, mothers dragging children indoors, men reaching for weapons they didn't need. One of the Lakota children, a girl no older than her youngest students, caught sight of the schoolhouse and waved shyly. Amelia waved back before catching herself, but it was too late. Sheriff Briggs had seen the exchange. Within minutes, heavy boots stomped up her steps. Briggs filled her doorway, his face flushed with anger or drink, probably both. "You encouraging them savages now, schoolmarm?" I waved at a child, Sheriff, nothing more. That's how it starts. He leaned against the door frame, his bulk making the wood creak. First it's waving, then it's teaching them alongside decent folks' children. Then before you know it, they're stealing our land, our cattle, our women. They were here first, Sheriff. If anyone stole... His hand slammed against the wall, making her jump. "You watch that eastern tongue of yours, Miss Ward. Judge Crane don't take kindly to Indian lovers. You ask what happened to the last teacher if you don't believe me." After he left, Amelia's hands shook as she tried to grade papers. That evening, she sought out Dr. Harrison, the town's elderly physician who seemed less infected by the prevailing hatred than most. She found him in his small office, mixing medicines by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, his weathered face kind but tired. "Miss Ward, what brings you here? Not illness, I hope." "Information, doctor, about the previous teacher." He sighed, setting down his mortar and pestle. "Rebecca Marsh, idealistic young woman, much like yourself. She believed education could bridge the divide between our peoples. Started teaching Lakota children in secret after regular school hours. What happened? Judge Crane discovered her betrayal, as he called it. Had her arrested for theft. Planted evidence, of course. She was given a choice: leave immediately or face trial." He met Amelia's eyes. She left, but not before Crane had Briggs and his men destroy her possessions, burn her books, a warning to anyone else who might harbor such dangerous ideas. Amelia walked home in the gathering dusk, her mind churning. The town square was empty, save for a few men heading to the saloon. As she passed the general store, she noticed a new sign in the window: "No Indians served here by order of Judge Crane." That night she lay awake listening to the wind howl across the plains. Somewhere out there, Lakota families huddled in their lodges, telling their own stories of loss and injustice. Children who would never learn to read because the color of their skin marked them as enemies. The weight of it pressed down on her like a physical thing. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Thomas Bradley, the blacksmith, appeared at her door during lunch hour. A giant of a man with gentle eyes, he'd always been polite but distant. Now he stood awkwardly on her step, turning his hat in massive hands. "Miss Ward, might I speak freely?" "Of course, Mr. Bradley. My boy Tom, he's taken to your teaching. Comes home talking about places he's never seen, ideas he's never heard." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Not everyone in Cedar Falls agrees with Judge Crane's ways. Some of us remember when Indians and whites traded peaceful-like. Some of us think, well, that hate's a poison that kills the one carrying it as much as anyone else." "That's a dangerous opinion to hold, Mr. Bradley." "Yes, ma'am, it is. But I wanted you to know you're not alone. There's others feel the same. Doc Harrison, the Quinns, a few more. We keep quiet to protect our families, but—" He set his jaw. Maybe it's time someone showed these children a different way. After he left, Amelia felt a tiny spark of hope. She wasn't alone, but as she returned to her classroom, she found Judge Crane waiting, examining the books on her desk with distaste. "Ah, Miss Ward, I've been hearing concerning reports about your teaching methods. I wasn't aware that arithmetic and spelling were concerning subjects." His smile was winter cold. "Don't be clever with me, young woman. You've been expressing sympathy for the savages, questioning the natural order of things." "I've been teaching facts, Judge Crane, nothing more." "Facts?" He picked up her history book, flipping through it with theatrical disgust. "Eastern facts. Liberal nonsense that ignores the reality of frontier life." He snapped the book shut. "Let me share some facts with you, Miss Ward. The Lakota are obstacles to progress. They squat on land that could be farmed, resources that could be harvested. They practice heathen religions and resist civilization at every turn. They're people, Judge, with families, traditions, rights." "Rights?" His voice rose sharply. "They have no rights. They exist at our sufferance, and that sufferance is wearing thin." He stepped closer, and she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "I built this town from nothing. I've protected it from savage depredations for 15 years. I will not have some Eastern school marm undo my work with her naive sympathies." He swept from the room, leaving Amelia trembling with suppressed anger. Through her window, she watched him stride across the square, townspeople bowing and scraping before him like peasants before a feudal lord. That afternoon, her students were more hostile than ever. They'd heard about Crane's visit. Nothing stayed secret long in Cedar Falls, and took it as license to express their own prejudices more openly. "My PA says Indians steal children," announced Samuel Morrison. "Says they raise 'em as savages, make 'em forget they was ever white." "That's enough, Samuel," Amelia said firmly, but the boy continued. "He says Judge Crane's gonna clear them all out soon. Says the army's coming to help. Says it'll be like cleaning vermin from a barn." The other children nodded eagerly, excited by the prospect of violence they couldn't truly comprehend. Amelia felt sick. These children, some barely old enough to write their names, were being shaped into instruments of hatred. As the days shortened and winter approached, the atmosphere in Cedar Falls grew ever more toxic. Judge Crane had begun holding regular meetings at the town hall, whipping up fear with tales of Indian atrocities, most invented or wildly exaggerated. The few Lakota who still came to trade were met with open hostility, sometimes violence. Amelia continued teaching, but her heart grew heavier each day. How could she plant seeds of knowledge in soil so poisoned by hate? How could she teach compassion to children who saw it as weakness? Late one evening, as she prepared lessons by lamplight, Sarah Mitchell appeared at her door. The pastor's wife looked more frightened than usual, glancing constantly over her shoulder. "There's talk," she whispered. "Judge Crane's planning something big. He's been meeting with men from other towns, men with reputations for solving Indian problems permanently. Surely the authorities." "He is the authority here," Sarah interrupted. "And he's got backing from powerful men who want the land. They don't care how it's cleared, as long as it's cleared." As Sarah hurried away into the darkness, Amelia stood in her doorway, looking out at the sleeping town. Somewhere beyond the circle of buildings, in the vast darkness of the plains, innocent people were marked for destruction simply because they existed. And here in Cedar Falls, children were being taught that this was not only acceptable, but righteous. She closed the door and returned to her desk, but couldn't focus on lesson plans. Instead, she found herself thinking of that Lakota girl who had waved at the schoolhouse. Where was she now? Did she dream of learning to read, of understanding the marks on paper that held such power in the white man's world? Amelia made a decision then, one that would change everything. She couldn't save the whole territory, couldn't stop the tide of hatred that men like Judge Crane had set in motion. But maybe, just maybe, she could save one child. Maybe she could prove that compassion was stronger than hate, that education could bridge even the widest divide. She didn't know yet how she would do it, or what it would cost her. But as she sat in her small circle of lamplight while the prairie wind howled outside, Amelia Ward prepared to take a stand against the darkness that had infected Cedar Falls. The real test of her convictions was coming, and it would demand more courage than she'd ever imagined possessing. The storm struck Cedar Falls with the fury of an angry god. Lightning split the sky while thunder shook the schoolhouse windows, and rain hammered the roof like countless fists demanding entry. Amelia huddled near her small stove, grading papers by lamplight as the tempest raged outside. It was nearly midnight when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A scratching at her door, weak but persistent. Then a soft thud. She hesitated, remembering Sheriff Briggs's warnings and Judge Crane's threats. But something in that sound spoke of desperation beyond fear. She unlatched the door, struggling against the wind that tried to tear it from her hands. A figure lay crumpled on her doorstep, a boy perhaps 12 or 13 years old, his buckskin clothing soaked through with rain and something darker. Blood seeped from wounds on his shoulder and side, mixing with the puddles forming on her floor. "Please," he whispered in accented English, his eyes wide with pain and terror. "Help!" Without thinking, Amelia dragged him inside, her teacher's dress quickly staining with his blood. She bolted the door and knelt beside him, her hands already moving to assess his injuries. The boy was Lakota. His braided hair, his clothing, his features all marked him as one of the people Judge Crane had taught the town to hate. "What's your name?" she asked softly, lighting more lamps to better see his wounds. "Little Eagle," he gasped. "White men, they call me Joseph." "I'm going to help you, Joseph, but you must be quiet. Can you do that?" He nodded, biting his lip as she began cutting away his torn shirt. What she found made her stomach turn. Bullet wound in the shoulder, knife slash across his ribs, bruises covering most of his visible skin. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic brutality. She worked through the night, using skills learned from helping her physician father years ago. Cleaned the wounds with whiskey from her medicinal supplies, extracted the bullet with tools sterilized in flame, stitched the worst cuts with thread meant for mending clothes. The boy, Joseph, she must think of him by his English name for safety, bore it all with remarkable stoicism, only occasionally letting out small whimpers of pain. As dawn light crept through her windows, she finally finished bandaging him. He lay on her small bed, fevered but stable. She pulled a chair close, exhausted but too worried to sleep. "Joseph," she said softly, "what happened? Where is your family?" Tears leaked from his closed eyes. "Dead, father, brother. They came in the night, many men with guns. Mother took baby sister, told me run, find help. But they followed." His voice broke. "I hid in the river, floated downstream, came here because I remembered the teacher who waved." Amelia's heart clenched. It was her. She was the teacher who had waved at the Lakota children weeks ago. That simple gesture of humanity had given this boy hope in his darkest hour. Your mother and sister. Where would they go? "Caves, in the northern hills. Safe place, but soldiers everywhere now. Judge Crane told them we stole cattle, killed a white man. Lies, all lies." His eyes opened, dark and pleading. "My father never stole. He traded honest, worked hard. They killed him because Judge wanted our land. Good water there, good grass." The full horror of it washed over Amelia. This wasn't about maintaining order or protecting settlers. This was calculated murder for profit. Ethnic cleansing dressed up as justice. "You're safe now," she promised, though she knew it was a lie. Nowhere in Cedar Falls was safe for a Lakota boy, especially not one who could testify to Judge Crane's crimes. She spent the day in a state of controlled panic, teaching her classes while Joseph lay hidden in her quarters. Every footstep outside made her heart race. When Sarah Mitchell stopped by after school, Amelia nearly collapsed from relief. "Sarah, I need your help," she whispered, pulling her friend inside. "But what I'm about to show you, it could put you in terrible danger." Sarah's face went white when she saw Joseph, but to her credit, she didn't flee. "Oh, merciful Lord. The raids last night. My husband heard the men talking. They're calling it a great victory, but—" She knelt beside the bed, her nurse's instincts overcoming fear. "This is murder, plain and simple. He says his mother and sister escaped. They're hiding in caves to the north. The miller's old claim. I know the place." Sarah checked Joseph's bandages with practiced hands. "These wounds. Amelia, if they find him here—" "I know, but I can't turn him out. He'll die." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My root cellar. It's hidden, separate from the house. We could move him there after dark. I'll bring food, medicine. Thomas won't approve of you risking. Thomas has been praying for the courage to act against this evil. Perhaps God has answered through this boy." They made their plans quickly. Sarah would prepare the hiding place and gather supplies. Amelia would keep Joseph hidden until nightfall. Then they'd move him. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. The afternoon dragged endlessly. Joseph drifted in and out of fevered sleep, occasionally crying out in his own language. Amelia sat beside him, bathing his forehead with cool water, whispering soothing words he might not understand, but hopefully found comforting. As sunset approached, he woke more fully. "Teacher," he said, his voice stronger, "why do you help me? Your people hate mine." "They're not my people," Amelia said firmly. "Fear and hatred don't make people mine. Kindness does, compassion does, and you're a child who needs help. That's all that matters." He studied her with eyes too old for his years. "My father said there were good whites. Mother didn't believe. She said goodness couldn't grow in poisoned soil." A weak smile. Maybe she was wrong. Just then, heavy boots thundered up her steps. Amelia barely had time to throw a blanket over Joseph and push him toward the corner before Sheriff Briggs burst through her door without knocking. "Search the place," he barked to the two men behind him. "Judge's orders." "How dare you!" Amelia stepped forward, blocking their path. "This is my home." "Not anymore, it ain't," Briggs sneered. "We got reports of you harboring a savage, a murderer who killed the Henshaw boy last night." "That's impossible. I've been here alone." "Save your lies, schoolmarm." He shoved past her, his men spreading out to ransack her few possessions. They overturned her desk, scattered her books, tore through her clothes with filthy hands. Amelia held her breath as one man approached the corner where Joseph hid. The blanket wasn't much concealment, and the boy's labored breathing seemed loud as thunder to her ears. But just then, Tom Bradley appeared in the doorway. "Sheriff, Judge wants you at the jail right quick. Says they caught one trying to steal horses." Briggs cursed. "Watch her," he told one man, then stomped out with the other. The remaining deputy was young, nervous. Amelia recognized him as Seth Morrison, one of her student's older brothers. "Seth," she said softly, "you know me. You know I'm no criminal." He shifted uncomfortably. "Orders is orders, Miss Ward. Can't go against Judge Crane." "I'm not asking you to. Just, could you check the front window? I thought I saw someone out there." The moment he turned away, she grabbed her heavy bookend and brought it down on the back of his head. He crumpled without a sound. She stood over him, shaking, unable to believe what she'd just done. But there was no time for regret. "Joseph, we have to go now." Together they dragged Seth's unconscious form behind the desk. He was breathing steadily. She'd been careful not to hit too hard. With luck, he'd wake with nothing worse than a headache and a wounded pride. The storm had returned, providing cover as they slipped out the back door. Joseph leaned heavily on her, his wounds making every step agony. They stayed in the shadows, moving toward the Mitchell house with agonizing slowness. Sarah met them at the root cellar. Thomas beside her with a lantern. The big blacksmith lifted Joseph as gently as if he were made of spun glass, carrying him down into the hidden space. It was small but dry, with blankets, food, and medical supplies already arranged. "This is madness," Thomas muttered. "When they find out, then we'll face the consequences together," Sarah said firmly. "As Christians should." Amelia knelt beside Joseph, checking his wounds one more time. The journey had reopened some of the cuts, but nothing life-threatening. "Rest now. We'll figure out how to get you to your mother." "Teacher," Joseph caught her hand. "My real name, it's Lakota. It means friend to everyone." He smiled weakly. "My father chose it, said I would build bridges between peoples. Then we'll make sure you live to build those bridges, Lakota." As she climbed from the cellar, Amelia knew there was no going back. She'd assaulted a deputy, harbored a fugitive, defied Judge Crane's authority. The morning would bring a reckoning. But looking at Sarah and Thomas, seeing the resolve in their faces despite their fear, she felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in Cedar Falls. Hope. Not everyone here was poisoned by hate. Some still believed in justice, in mercy, in the fundamental worth of every human life. "Go home," Thomas told her. "Act normal. When they come, and they will come, deny everything." Seth was drunk, confused. "You never left your house." "I won't let you take the blame." "Won't be the first time I've stood against Crane," Thomas said grimly. "Man's had it coming for years. Now go, before someone sees you." Amelia made her way back through the rain, her clothes soaked, her heart racing. In her quarters, she positioned Seth more comfortably and placed a bottle of whiskey near his hand. Let them think he'd been drinking on duty. She sat at her desk as if grading papers, though her hands shook too badly to hold a pen. Outside, the storm was breaking up, stars appearing between the racing clouds. Somewhere in the darkness, a wounded boy named Lakota lay hidden, clinging to life and hope. Somewhere else, his mother and sister huddled in caves, praying for a miracle. And here in Cedar Falls, 3 ordinary people had chosen to stand against evil, knowing it might cost them everything. The die was cast. Tomorrow would bring Judge Crane's wrath, but tonight, for just this moment, compassion had won a small victory over hate. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, one boy's life against a tide of violence and greed. But sometimes, Amelia thought as she waited for dawn and whatever judgment it would bring, one life was enough to start an avalanche of change. Sometimes, one act of kindness could light a fire that no amount of darkness could extinguish. Dawn came like an executioner, cold and inevitable. Amelia hadn't slept, couldn't eat, could only wait as the sun painted Cedar Falls in shades of judgment. She'd changed into her best dress. If she was to face Judge Crane's wrath, she'd do it with dignity and tact. The pounding on her door came at precisely 7 o'clock. Not Sheriff Briggs this time, but Judge Crane himself, flanked by 6 armed men. His silver hair caught the morning light like a crown of ice, and his pale eyes held the satisfied gleam of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "Miss Ward," his voice was silk over steel, "you've been very foolish." "I don't know what you mean, Judge Crane." "No?" He stepped inside uninvited, his men spreading out behind him. "Then perhaps you can explain why Deputy Morrison was found unconscious in your quarters, why there's blood on your floor, why Thomas Bradley was seen near your building at midnight." Seth Morrison stood among the men, a bandage around his head and murder in his eyes. He'd clearly been coached on what to say, and Amelia knew her weak alibi wouldn't stand against his testimony. "I found an injured dog," she said, lifting her chin. "I treated its wounds. Deputy Morrison was intoxicated when he arrived. He fell and struck his head." Crane's laugh was like breaking glass. "An injured dog. How touching. And this dog, did it happen to walk on 2 legs? Did it speak Lakota?" The men tore through her quarters again, more thoroughly this time. They found the bloody rags she hadn't had time to burn, the medical supplies she'd used, even a few long black hairs caught on a splinter of wood. Each piece of evidence was presented to Crane like an offering. "Enough games," he said finally. "Where's the savage?" "I don't know what." His hand cracked across her face, the force spinning her into the wall. "I said enough. You harbored a murderer, a savage who killed an innocent white boy. His blood is on your hands, Miss Ward. The Henshaw boy was part of the raiding party? Amelia gasped, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip. You sent children to commit murder? Another blow, this time from Briggs. The room spun, and she found herself on her knees, fighting not to vomit. Search the Mitchell place, Crane ordered. The blacksmith's shop, every building in town if necessary. Find that savage. No! The word tore from Amelia's throat. Please, I acted alone. They knew nothing. Loyalty, how admirable and how misplaced. Crane hauled her to her feet, his fingers digging into her arms. You have one chance, Miss Ward. Tell me where the boy is, and I might show mercy. Continue this charade, and you'll learn what justice means in Cedar Falls. She met his eyes, seeing the madness there, the absolute certainty of a man who'd rewritten reality to suit his purposes. I've seen your justice, Judge Crane. I've seen it in the blood of innocents, in the tears of children, in the fear that poisons this town. I'll take no part in it. His face contorted with rage. Then you'll serve as an example to others who might harbor such dangerous sympathies. Sheriff, arrest her for aiding a fugitive and conspiracy to commit treason against the lawful authority of Cedar Falls. They dragged her into the street, making sure everyone saw. Windows filled with faces, some shocked, some satisfied, most simply afraid. The children she'd taught watched wide-eyed as their teacher was marched past like a common criminal. In the town square, a crowd had already gathered. Word traveled fast in Cedar Falls, and Judge Crane never missed an opportunity for public theater. A wooden platform had been hastily erected. Not quite gallows, but the implication was clear. Citizens of Cedar Falls, Crane addressed the crowd, his voice carrying across the square. We stand at a crossroads. Behind us lies the safety and prosperity we've built through strength and vigilance. Ahead lies chaos, should we allow sentiment to override sense. He gestured to Amelia, held between two deputies. This woman, trusted with your children's education, has betrayed that sacred trust. She harbored a savage, a murderer who took young Matthew Henshaw's life. She chose the enemy over her own kind. Liar! Sarah Mitchell's voice rang out from the crowd. She pushed forward, Thomas beside her. Matthew Henshaw died raiding peaceful families. This is about greed, not justice. Arrest them, Crane said casually. Conspiracy spreads like a disease. We must cut it out root and stem. But Thomas Bradley wasn't taken easily. The blacksmith's massive fists sent two deputies sprawling before Briggs cracked him across the skull with a rifle butt. Sarah screamed as her husband fell, blood streaming down his face. You see? Crane addressed the crowd again. This is what comes of false compassion, violence, disorder. The savage's influence corrupts even decent folks. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, elderly but unbowed. Judge Crane, surely this has gone far enough. These are good people. Good people don't harbor killers, Doctor. Good people don't challenge lawful authority. Crane's eyes swept the crowd. Anyone else wish to declare their sympathies? Silence fell like a shroud. Parents pulled children close. Men who'd spoken privately against Crane's methods now studied their boots. Fear won, as it always did. Miss Ward, Crane turned back to Amelia. Last chance, the savage's location, and you might yet avoid the full weight of justice. She thought of Dakota, little eagle who built bridges, son and brother, wounded child clinging to life in a dark cellar. She thought of his mother and baby sister, hiding in caves, waiting for a reunion that might never come. I taught my students that America stands for justice, she said, her voice carrying clear despite her swollen lip. That every person has value, regardless of their birth. That might doesn't make right. She looked directly at the children in the crowd. I still believe that, and I pray someday you'll remember those lessons, even if you forget me. Touching. Crane's voice dripped contempt. But empty words won't save you, since you refuse to see reason. He paused dramatically. River justice, the old way. Let the Blackwater decide your fate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. River justice, a barbaric practice from the territory's earliest days. The accused was bound and thrown into the river. If they drowned, they were guilty. If they somehow survived, God had shown them innocent. With the Blackwater running high and fast from the storms, it was a death sentence. You can't! Sarah struggled against the men holding her. This is murder! This is justice, Crane corrected. Frontier justice for frontier crimes. He smiled coldly at Amelia. "Unless you've reconsidered." She thought of her comfortable life in Philadelphia, the safety she'd abandoned for this violent place. She thought of her sister, who'd begged her not to come west. She thought of all the chances she'd had to stay silent, to teach only what Judge Crane approved, to close her eyes to injustice. "I have nothing to say to you," she told him, "except that history will judge you for what you truly are, a small, frightened man who built his power on the graves of innocents." The blow came from behind this time, dropping her to her knees. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Crane giving orders. "Take her to the river. Let everyone see what happens to Indian lovers and agitators." They hauled her upright, her vision swimming. As they dragged her toward the edge of town, she caught glimpses of faces in the crowd. Some wept openly, others turned away, but none intervened. Fear had paralyzed them all. The path to the Blackwater seemed endless and all too short. She could hear the river before she saw it, a roaring beast swollen with storm water, carrying debris and death in its muddy embrace. The banks were lined with people who'd followed to witness frontier justice in action. They bound her wrists behind her back, the rope cutting deep. Her ankles were likewise tied, ensuring she'd have no chance of swimming even if the current didn't dash her against the rocks. "Any last words?" Crane asked, playing to his audience. Amelia looked past him to the crowd, finding the faces of her students among them. "Remember," she called to them, "remember that hate is taught, not born. Remember that every person deserves dignity. Remember that standing for what's right is worth any price." "Enough." Crane nodded to Briggs. "Do it." The sheriff and another man lifted her, carrying her to the very edge of the bank. Below, the Blackwater raged like something alive and hungry. She could see tree trunks spinning in the current, boulders that would crush a body like paper. "Wait!" A small voice pierced the morning air. Mary Quinn broke from her mother's grasp, running forward with tears streaming down her face. "Please don't! She's a good teacher! She never hurt nobody!" "Get that child back," Crane ordered, but Mary's courage had broken something in the crowd. Other voices rose, not many, but some. "Please for mercy, for real justice, for sanity." "Silence!" Crane roared. "You'll watch and learn or join her fate." He turned back to Amelia, and for just a moment, she saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. But only for a moment. "Throw her in." Time slowed. She felt hands on her back, the sensation of falling, the shock of impact as icy water enclosed her like a fist. The current took her immediately, spinning her in its grip, pulling her down into darkness. Her last coherent thought was not of death, but of life, of Lakota hidden in the cellar, of children who might yet learn compassion, of small acts of kindness that could grow into something larger. She'd planted seeds, however few. Perhaps that was enough. The Blackwater claimed her, carrying her into its roaring heart. On the bank, Judge Crane stood triumphant while a town watched in horror and shame. Sarah Mitchell collapsed in her husband's arms. Children who'd been taught to hate saw their gentle teacher murdered for the crime of compassion. But in a root cellar across town, a Lakota boy named Dakota lived on, proof that love could survive even in the darkest places. And somewhere in the crowd, hearts began to turn against the tyrant who ruled through fear. The river had taken Amelia Ward, but her words lingered like seeds in fertile soil, waiting for the right moment to bloom into revolution. The Blackwater was death incarnate, a raging brown serpent that seized Amelia's bound body and dragged her into its freezing depths. Water filled her lungs as the current slammed her against submerged rocks, each impact driving precious air from her chest. Her vision darkened, sparkled with stars that weren't stars but the approaching face of eternity. Then, through the roar of water and blood in her ears, she heard it, a war cry that cut through the chaos like a blade. A shadow passed overhead, diving from the cliff top with the grace of an eagle and the fury of a storm. Strong arms encircled her, pulling her up toward air that seemed impossibly distant. Her rescuer fought the current with inhuman strength, using the river's own power to angle them toward a calmer eddy near the far bank. But Amelia's consciousness was fading, her body limp as a rag doll in the water's grip. They struck a sandbar hard, the impact jarring but blessedly solid. Her rescuer dragged her fully onto the narrow strip of land, hidden from the far bank by a curtain of willow trees. Through her water-blurred vision, she saw him, a Lakota warrior, his long hair plastered to his bronze skin, his face fierce with determination. He cut her bonds with quick slashes of his knife, then turned her on her side as she vomited river water. But she wasn't breathing. The warrior, he couldn't have been older than 25, pressed his ear to her chest, then tilted her head back. Without hesitation, he sealed his mouth over hers, breathing life into her drowning lungs. Once, twice, 3 times, pressing on her chest between breaths. The intimacy of it, this stranger's lips on hers, his breath becoming her breath, would have scandalized her in any other circumstance. But this was life and death, and propriety had no place on this hidden sandbar. Finally, she coughed, spasmed, drew in a ragged breath of her own. Water poured from her mouth as she gasped like a landed fish, her body remembering how to live. The warrior sat back on his heels, relief flickering across his stoic features. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice raw. "You saved Lakota," he replied in careful English. "My sister's son. I am Whitehawk. I watch town, wait for chance to find him." Even through her shock and exhaustion, Amelia understood. This was Dakota's uncle, one of the warriors who'd survived the massacre. He'd been watching Cedar Falls, had seen them throw her in the river, had risked everything to save her. "Dakota! He's alive! Hidden! Safe!" Whitehawk's composure cracked, showing the anguish beneath. "His father, my brother, dead, many dead, but my sister, baby, some others, we hide. Wait, plan." He studied her with dark, intelligent eyes. "You are teacher who waved. Dakota spoke of you before attack." Shouts echoed from across the river. Judge Crane's men were following the bank, looking for her body. Whitehawk lifted her effortlessly, despite her waterlogged weight. "Come, not safe here." He carried her into the willows, then along hidden paths only he could see. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, shock and cold claiming her strength. The world faded in and out, trees, sky, the steady rhythm of his breathing as he ran with her in his arms. When consciousness fully returned, she lay on soft furs in a small cave. A fire crackled nearby, its smoke drawn up through a natural chimney in the rock. She was wrapped in a buffalo robe, her wet clothes drying on wooden frames. The impropriety of it struck her. She wore only her undergarments beneath the robe, but again, survival trumped society's rules. Whitehawk sat across the fire, preparing something in a clay pot. He'd changed into dry buckskins, his hair rebraided, looking every inch the warrior from sensational novels. But his eyes held kindness along with strength. "Drink," he said, offering her the pot. Medicine tea, warm inside. The liquid was bitter but soothing, spreading heat through her frozen core. As she drank, he spoke in his measured way. "Dakota is strong, boy, smart, like his father." Pain flickered across his features. "My brother, running deer. He believed in peace, said whites and Lakota must learn to live together. Judge Crane, he pretended friendship, traded with us. Then he saw our land, our water, wanted it. So he manufactured a conflict," Amelia said, her teacher's mind grasping the strategy. "Created fear to justify theft. Yes, he paid bad men to raid our camp at night. Women, children, elders, no difference to them. I was hunting, came back to—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "Found Dakota in river like you, brought him to town because nowhere else to go. Hoped someone—" He gestured at her. "Someone like you." "There are others in town who want to help," Amelia said urgently. "The Mitchells are hiding Dakota. Thomas Bradley, Dr. Harrison, they're good people. They just need leadership, hope." "Hope!" Whitehawk's laugh was bitter. "What hope against men like Crane? He has guns, law, fear. We have nothing. You have truth, and now you have witnesses. I saw Dakota's wounds, heard his story. Others know Crane's lies. If we could reach federal authorities who want our land too." He shook his head. "No, teacher. Justice does not come from their courts." They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Amelia pulled the buffalo robe tighter, acutely aware of her vulnerability, not just her state of undress, but her complete dependence on this man who had every reason to hate her people. "Why save me?" she asked finally. Your family is dead, your people scattered. Why risk yourself for a white woman? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, when Lakota spoke of teacher who waved, his eyes had light in them. First light since father died. You gave him hope when you had no reason to. This is, how you say, honor debt. There's no debt. I did what anyone should. No. His voice was firm. Not anyone. You did what was right when it cost everything. This is warrior's courage. He met her eyes across the fire. My brother would say you have Lakota heart and white body. The compliment warmed her more than the tea. They talked as the day waned. About Dakota. About the hidden survivors. About the impossible situation they faced. Whitehawk told her about Lakota ways, their connection to the land Crane wanted to steal. She told him about Philadelphia. About her dream of education bridging divides. Foolish dream, he said, but not unkindly. All the best dreams are foolish until they come true. As darkness fell, exhaustion claimed her. The last thing she remembered was Whitehawk singing softly in his own language. A prayer song, she thought, or perhaps a lullaby. His voice was deep and soothing, and despite everything, the violence, the near death, the uncertain future, she felt safe. She woke in the depths of night to find him keeping watch at the cave mouth, his silhouette sharp against the stars. He'd covered her with another robe while she slept, maintained the fire, guarded her rest. This man whose family had been slaughtered by her people protected her with unwavering dedication. You should sleep, she said softly. He glanced back. Soon. First we plan. Cannot stay here. Crane's men will search. Must get you somewhere safe. Get Dakota to his mother. I won't leave without ensuring Dakota's safety. Stubborn woman, he said, but there was approval in it. Like Lakota women, they also don't listen to sense. Despite everything, she smiled. Then we'd better make a plan that doesn't require sense. He turned fully toward her then, firelight playing across his features. There is way. Dangerous. Requires trust between us. You saved my life. You have my trust. And you saved Dakota. You have mine. He moved closer to the fire, his expression serious. My sister, others. They hide in sacred caves. Secret place, protected. I could take you there, but it would mean revealing your people's sanctuary to a white woman. Yes, some will say I betray them, but... He studied her face. I think you different. Think maybe you bridge my brother dreamed of. The weight of his trust settled on her shoulders like a mantle. I swear to you, on my life, I'll never betray your people. He nodded slowly. Then we go tomorrow night. Get Dakota, others who helped. Bring all to caves. From there. He shrugged. From there, we see. They spent the remaining hours until dawn planning. Whitehawk drew maps in the dirt, showing her the routes in and out of Cedar Falls, the hiding places, the dangers. She told him about the town's layout, who could be trusted, who couldn't. As the first light of dawn touched the sky, he doused the fire. Time to move. Crane will search harder today. Must stay ahead. He gave her dry clothes, a mixture of her own repaired dress and Lakota additions for warmth. As she changed behind a buffalo robe screen, she thought about how her life had transformed in mere days. From proper Philadelphia teacher to fugitive, from following rules to breaking them, from fearing the unknown to trusting a Lakota warrior with her life. When she emerged, Whitehawk had packed their few supplies. He looked at her transformed appearance, part white woman, part something wilder, and nodded approval. Now you look like Survivor, he said. Come, long journey ahead. As they left the cave, Amelia paused at the entrance, looking back at the place where she'd been reborn. The river had tried to claim her, but instead had delivered her to something larger than herself. A chance to truly make a difference, to be the bridge between worlds that both Whitehawk's brother and she had dreamed of. Whitehawk moved ahead, scouting the path, every movement fluid and sure. She followed, trusting him completely, knowing that whatever came next, she was no longer the naive Eastern teacher who'd arrived in Cedar Falls. The Blackwater had taken that woman. What emerged was something stronger, tempered by water and fire, bound by purpose and growing understanding to the warrior who'd breathed life back into her body. Their journey into danger was just beginning, but for the first time since arriving in Wyoming territory, Amelia Ward knew exactly where she belonged, standing between two worlds, fighting for both, protected by a warrior's honor and her own unshakable conviction that love could conquer hate. Even in the darkest places, even against impossible odds, even here, in the wild heart of an untamed land where death came swift and justice was whatever the strongest man declared it to be. The sacred caves lay hidden in a canyon so well concealed that Amelia would have ridden past it a dozen times without seeing the entrance. Whitehawk led her through a narrow crevice between towering rocks, their horses left hidden in a grove below. The passage opened into a series of natural chambers, lit by fires and sheltered from the bitter wind. Lakota families clustered in small groups, perhaps 30 souls in all, mostly women, children, and elderly. They looked up as Whitehawk entered, their expressions shifting from hope to suspicion when they saw Amelia behind him. "Whitehawk brings enemy to our sacred place." An elderly woman rose, her face etched with grief and anger. "Has grief stolen your senses?" "She saved Lakota, grandmother," Whitehawk replied respectfully. "The whites threw her in the river for showing mercy to our people." "She is not enemy." A younger woman pushed through the crowd, a baby on her hip. Her face was Whitehawk's in feminine form, the same strong bones, the same piercing eyes. This was Lakota's mother, Whitehawk's sister. "My son?" she whispered. "You found him?" "Alive," Amelia said, stepping forward. "Hidden with good people in town. We're going to bring him to you." The woman's composure cracked. She thrust the baby at another woman and grasped Amelia's hands, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my boy? He saved himself," Amelia said gently. "He's brave, like his father, like his uncle." The woman, she introduced herself as Morningstar, pulled Amelia to the fire, insisting she eat, rest, tell everything. The other Lakota gathered close, their hostility fading as they heard the story. An elder translated for those who didn't speak English, and Amelia heard gasps, murmurs of disbelief, even scattered applause when she described standing up to Judge Crane. "You have courage," the grandmother admitted grudgingly. "Foolish courage, but courage. Still, one good white does not erase what others do." "No," Amelia agreed. "But perhaps one good white and another can start to build something better. There are others in Cedar Falls who want to help. They just need what? Warriors to die for them?" A young man interrupted, his arm in a sling from the raid. "We've lost enough. You need justice," Amelia said firmly. "Real justice, not Crane's version. And for that, you need witnesses, testimony, proof of his crimes that even federal authorities can't ignore." Whitehawk had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he spoke. "She speaks truth. Hiding keeps us alive but solves nothing. Crane grows stronger, takes more land. Soon, no place left to hide." "Then what do you propose?" Morningstar asked, her eyes moving between her brother and Amelia. They talked through the night, planning something that seemed impossible. A legal challenge to Crane's authority, backed by testimony from both white and Lakota witnesses. It would require immense courage from the townspeople who'd helped hide Lakota, and trust from the Lakota who had every reason to expect betrayal. "The Mitchells will help," Amelia said. "Dr. Harrison has influence with authorities back east. Thomas Bradley commands respect among the workers. If we can show them proof of Crane's murders, his false accusations—" If, the grandmother spat. "If wishes were horses, we'd all ride free." But Morningstar was nodding slowly. "My husband believed in law, in justice. He thought papers and words could protect us." Her voice hardened. "He was wrong, but maybe his way and warrior way together." As dawn approached, they'd formed a plan. Amelia and Whitehawk would return to Cedar Falls under cover of darkness. They'd retrieve Lakota and gather any townspeople willing to stand against Crane. Meanwhile, Morningstar would prepare testimony from the survivors, documenting the unprovoked attack, the murders, the truth Crane had tried to bury with bullets. "This is dangerous," Whitehawk said as he and Amelia prepared to leave. "If caught—" "We've both already died once," Amelia reminded him. "What's left to fear?" He smiled then, a rare expression that transformed his stern features. "You sound like Lakota woman now. Next you'll be telling me about your visions." They traveled through the day, avoiding main paths, resting in hidden places Whitehawk knew. As they went, they talked, not about plans or danger, but about life. He told her about growing up on the plains, about buffalo hunts and winter counts, about the sacred stories his grandmother shared. She told him about Philadelphia's cobbled streets, about her father's medical practice, about the books that had shaped her dreams of teaching. Different worlds, he said as they watered their horses at a hidden spring. Not so different, she countered. Both have families who love their children, people who seek justice, dreamers who imagine better futures. He looked at her then with an expression she couldn't quite read. My brother would have liked you. He collected bridges, words between languages, stories shared by different peoples. Anything that connected. His voice softened. I thought he was naive. Now I think maybe he saw farther than rest of us. They reached Cedar Falls' outskirts as full darkness fell. The town looked different to Amelia now. Smaller, meaner, a cluster of fear and greed masquerading as civilization. But lights glowed in certain windows. The Mitchells, Dr. Harrison's, the blacksmith shop where Thomas Bradley often worked late. I'll go to Mitchell's first, she whispered. Get to Coda, explain our plan. I come with you. No, you're too recognizable, too valuable. If something goes wrong, he caught her arm as she turned to go. Amelia. It was the first time he'd used her given name. Be careful. You've died once for my people. Don't make it twice. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Without thinking, she placed her hand over his. I'll be careful. Wait for my signal. 2 lanterns in the church tower means it's safe. She slipped through the shadows, every nerve taut. The Mitchell house was dark, save for a single candle in the kitchen window. Sarah's signal that all was well. Amelia tapped the coded knock they'd arranged. Sarah yanked her inside, gasping. Amelia, we thought everyone said you drowned. Nearly. Where's Dakota? Still in the cellar. Oh, Amelia, it's been terrible. Crane's gone mad with rage. He's arrested 3 more families for harboring sympathies. He's planning something awful. Then we haven't much time. Quickly, Amelia explained their plan. Sarah's face went white, then red with determination. Yes, she said simply. Thomas feels the same. We can't live under this tyrant anymore. She called softly to her husband, who emerged from their bedroom, still moving stiffly from his beating. Miss Ward. The blacksmith's eyes widened. Lord be praised. When we saw you go into that river, there's no time, Thomas. Are you with us? Aye, and I know others who will be. Quinn's had enough. His little Mary hasn't stopped crying since they threw you in. The Hendersons, too, once they learned the truth about their boy being part of a murder raid. His face darkened. Men are starting to see Crane for what he is. They retrieved Dakota from the cellar. The boy clung to Amelia, sobbing with relief. His wounds were healing well under Sarah's care, and his eyes lit up when she told him about his mother and uncle. Uncle Whitehawk's here? He's alive? Very alive and waiting to take you home. As Thomas went to gather allies, Amelia and Sarah prepared Dakota for travel. The boy was weak but determined, desperate to reunite with his family. They bundled him in warm clothes and gave him food for strength. Teacher, he said softly as they waited, they said you died for me. Why? Amelia knelt beside him. Because every life has value, Dakota. Because your father's dream of peace is worth fighting for. Because sometimes we have to stand up to evil, even when we're afraid. Were you afraid? Terrified, she admitted. But being afraid and doing right anyway. That's what courage is. One by one, Thomas returned with allies. Dr. Harrison came first, carrying his medical bag and a grim expression. I've documented everything, he said. The false charges, the murders, all of it. If we can get this to federal authorities. The Quinns arrived next, then 2 other families. Not many, but more than Amelia had dared hope. Even Seth Morrison slunk in, shamefaced and sporting fresh bruises. Judge went too far, he muttered, throwing a woman in the river, planning to burn out the remaining Indians. It ain't right. My ma didn't raise me for such work. Redemption comes to those who seek it, Sarah said gently. They made their way to the church, where Amelia lit 2 lanterns in the tower. Within minutes, Whitehawk materialized from the darkness, moving silent as smoke. The townspeople gasped at his sudden appearance, hands moving instinctively toward weapons. Peace, Amelia said quickly. He's our ally, Dakota's uncle. The reunion between Whitehawk and Lakota was brief but powerful. The warrior's composed facade cracked as he embraced his nephew, whispering prayers of thanksgiving in Lakota. Then, businesslike, he turned to the assembled townspeople. "You risk much," he said simply. "Why?" Thomas Bradley stepped forward. "Because we've been cowards too long. Because what happened to your people could happen to any of us once Crane decides we're in his way. Because it's right." Whitehawk studied each face, then nodded slowly. "Then we are allies. Come. Dawn approaches, and we must be far from here before Crane discovers his town has turned against him." As they prepared to leave, Amelia looked back at the schoolhouse where this had all begun. It stood empty and dark, but she imagined she could see phantom children at the windows, both white and Lakota, learning together, building the bridge Dakota's father had envisioned. "We'll come back," Whitehawk said softly beside her. "When Crane falls, when justice comes, we'll rebuild. Together, together," she agreed, and felt the words settle into her bones like a promise, like a prayer, like the first note of a song that would echo across the plains and into the hearts of all who dreamed of something better than fear and hate. They rode into the darkness, White and Lakota, teacher and warrior, united by purpose and growing trust. Behind them, Cedar Falls slept uneasily under Judge Crane's iron fist. But change was coming, carried on the wind like seeds of hope, nurtured by courage and watered with sacrifice. The bridge between worlds had begun to form, one life at a time, one choice at a time, one act of faith reaching across the divide to clasp another's hand in common cause. The plan took shape in the sacred caves over 2 days of intense preparation. Dr. Harrison worked with Morningstar to document testimonies while Amelia helped translate. Thomas Bradley and the other men from town learned the layout of Cedar Falls' weak points from Whitehawk's scouting. Every detail had to be perfect. They would have only one chance. "Crane keeps important papers in his study," Seth Morrison revealed, still wrestling with his conscience. "Land deeds he forged, orders for the raids, correspondence with buyers back east wanting Indian land. If we could get those." "Too dangerous," Thomas said. "His house is a fortress." "Not during a fire," Whitehawk observed quietly. "When flames threaten, even fortresses empty." The plan crystallized. Create a diversion large enough to draw Crane and his men away. Retrieve Dakota's captured relatives from the jail. Secure the incriminating documents. And escape before the judge realized he'd been outmaneuvered. It required precise timing and absolute courage. "The grain warehouse," Dr. Harrison suggested. "It's far from any homes, but valuable enough that Crane would have to respond. And this time of year, with the wheat just stored." "I'll do it," Seth volunteered, eager to prove his change of heart. "I know the guards' patterns." As darkness fell on the chosen night, their ragtag alliance took positions. The Lakota warriors, led by Whitehawk, concealed themselves near the jail. The townspeople scattered to their assigned posts. Amelia and Sarah would enter Crane's house during the chaos. 2 women were less likely to be seen as threats if caught. The signal came at midnight, a red glow blooming on the eastern edge of town as the warehouse erupted in flames. The fire bell clanged frantically, and within minutes, the streets filled with running men. Crane's voice rose above the chaos, barking orders, directing the bucket brigades. "Now!" Whitehawk whispered, and his warriors moved like shadows toward the jail. Amelia and Sarah hurried through the empty streets to Crane's mansion. The front door stood open, abandoned by servants rushing to fight the fire. They slipped inside, Sarah standing watch while Amelia searched the study. The room reeked of cigar smoke and arrogance. Massive desk, leather chairs, walls lined with books Crane had probably never read. All props in his performance of civilization. Amelia went straight to the desk drawers. Locked, of course, but Thomas had taught her how to use hairpins on simple locks. Her hands shook as she worked, ears straining for any sound of return. The first drawer yielded nothing but correspondence. The second held ledgers showing bribes to territorial officials. But the third, "Dear God," she breathed. Maps marking Lakota camps for elimination, lists of families to be relocated or removed, forged documents claiming attacks that never happened, and most damning, Orders to hired killers, signed in Crane's own hand, detailing payment for murders disguised as Indian raids. "Amelia, hurry!" Sarah hissed from the doorway. She grabbed everything she could carry, stuffing documents into a leather satchel. As she turned to leave, her eye caught a small painting on the wall. A young boy, perhaps 15, with Crane's cold eyes but a cruel twist to his mouth. Jacob Crane, who'd started a drunken fight and died for it, launching his father's campaign of vengeance. Footsteps on the porch. No time for the front door. Amelia grabbed Sarah's hand and they fled through the kitchen, bursting into the garden as voices filled the house behind them. At the jail, Whitehawk's rescue was already underway. The few guards left behind had been quickly overwhelmed. Cell doors hung open, and Lakota prisoners, mostly young men arrested on false charges, stumbled into freedom. Among them was Red Sky, Dakota's older cousin, who, despite weeks of imprisonment, immediately asked about the boy. "Safe," Whitehawk assured him. The white teacher saved him. Red Sky's eyes found Amelia as she and Sarah arrived, breathless from their escape. "You are the one who defied Crane?" "We all defied him," she gasped, holding up the satchel. "And now we have proof of his crimes." But their triumph was short-lived. A shout went up from the direction of the warehouse. The fire was under control, and Crane would soon discover their deception. Worse, hoofbeats thundered in the distance. Reinforcements from neighboring towns, summoned by Crane days earlier to help solve the Indian problem once and for all. "Go," Thomas Bradley urged, appearing from the shadows. "Get to the caves. We'll delay them." "You'll be slaughtered," Whitehawk protested. "Maybe, but some of us need to stay. Bear witness. Make sure the truth gets out." The blacksmith gripped Whitehawk's arm. "This is our fight too now. Go!" They fled into the darkness, Lakota and White together, criminals in the eyes of Crane's law, but united in purpose. Behind them, Cedar Falls erupted in confusion as Crane discovered his prisoners gone, his documents stolen, his absolute control shattered. They'd barely reached the edge of town when riders appeared, cutting off their escape route. Sheriff Briggs led them, his face twisted with rage in the torchlight. "Going somewhere, Indian lover?" he snarled at Amelia. "Thought you drowned like the rat you are." "Let them pass, Luther." Dr. Harrison stepped from the shadows, rifle in hand. Behind him stood Thomas Bradley and a dozen townsmen. "It's over. We know the truth about Crane's murders." "Truth?" Briggs laughed. "Truth is what Judge Crane says it is. Now stand aside before—" The shot came from behind Briggs. One of his own deputies, young Will Henderson, had turned his gun on a fellow rider who'd been drawing on the doctor. "No more killing," the young man shouted. "My brother died for Crane's lies. No more." Chaos erupted. Gunfire crackled through the night as Crane's loyalists fought those who'd turned against him. Whitehawk pushed Amelia to the ground, shielding her with his body as bullets whined overhead. Sarah screamed as Thomas took a bullet in the shoulder but kept fighting. Through the melee, Amelia saw him, Judge Crane himself, arriving with more men, his face a mask of cold fury. His eyes found hers across the battlefield, and she saw murder there. "Kill them all," he roared. "Every savage, every traitor, clean out this nest of vipers." But his words were drowned out by a new sound. War cries from the hills. Morning Star had brought reinforcements. Lakota warriors who'd been hiding, waiting, biding their time, now swept down like an avalanche. Not to massacre, but to rescue their imprisoned kin and the whites who'd risked everything to help them. The battle raged through the streets of Cedar Falls. The general store became a fortress for Crane's men. The church sheltered wounded from both sides, Sarah working frantically to save lives regardless of allegiance. And in the center of it all, Judge Crane stood like a demon from hell, shooting at anything that moved, screaming about civilization and savages. It was Red Sky who ended it. The young warrior, weakened by imprisonment but burning with purpose, tackled Crane from behind. They rolled in the dust, fighting for the judge's gun. The shot, when it came, seemed to freeze time. Crane staggered back, clutching his chest where his own bullet had found him. He looked down at the spreading red stain with genuine surprise, as if he'd never considered his own mortality. "You!" he gasped, falling to his knees. His eyes found Amelia again. "You brought savagery to paradise." "No," she said quietly, walking to stand over him. You brought hatred to a place where peace was possible. You created the very savagery you claimed to fight. Judge Elias Crane died in the dust of the town he'd ruled through fear, surrounded by the chaos he'd created. His last sight, the united faces of red and white standing together against his legacy of hate. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. Briggs and a few diehards fled into the night. The rest threw down their weapons, shocked by their leader's death and the revelation of his crimes. Dawn was breaking, painting Cedar Falls in shades of blood and hope. It's finished, Whitehawk said, helping Amelia to her feet. No, she corrected, looking at the wounded being tended regardless of race, at former enemies sharing water, at Dakota embracing his rescued cousin. It's just beginning. Dr. Harrison, despite a graze on his arm, was already organizing. We need to get word to the federal marshals immediately. These documents must reach authorities before Crane's allies can cover their tracks. All right, volunteered Will Henderson, still shaking from the night's events. I know where to find honest lawmen. My brother, he'd want me to make this right. As the sun rose fully, Cedar Falls looked like a different world. The jail stood empty, its door hanging open like a broken tooth. Crane's mansion was being searched, revealing more evidence of his crimes. And in the street where hatred had ruled, Lakota and White worked side by side to tend wounded and rebuild. Amelia stood with Whitehawk on the hill overlooking town, the same spot where she'd first seen Cedar Falls months ago. So much had changed, so much had been lost. But something new was struggling to be born. Your brother's dream, she said softly. It's possible now. Because of you, Whitehawk replied. You built the first bridge. We built it together. She looked up at him, this warrior who'd saved her life and fought beside her for justice. All of us, one choice at a time. He smiled then, that rare expression that transformed his face. Dakota was right. You do have a Lakota heart. He paused, then added softly, and perhaps this Lakota has learned something of white courage too. In the town below, Sarah Mitchell was organizing a meal for everyone, insisting that Lakota and White sit together. Thomas Bradley, arm in a sling but spirit unbowed, was already planning how to rebuild more fairly. And Dakota ran between both groups, a living bridge between worlds, his laughter rising like a prayer of hope. The battle for Cedar Falls was over, but the work of building true community had just begun. It would take time, patience, and continued courage. There would be setbacks, federal investigations, the slow grinding wheels of justice. But on this morning, with the sun washing clean the blood-stained streets and former enemies reaching across divides, anything seemed possible. The seeds Amelia had planted with her simple act of waving at a Lakota child had grown into something neither Crane's hatred nor all his violence could destroy. Justice had come to Cedar Falls at last, written in lead and blood, but sealed with the promise of a better tomorrow. Spring came to Cedar Falls like a benediction, painting the prairie in shades of green and gold. 6 months had passed since Judge Crane's fall, and the town bore little resemblance to the place ruled by fear and hatred. Where once signs proclaimed no Indians served, new boards welcomed all honest traders. The jail that had held innocent Lakota now served as a schoolhouse annex, its bars removed and windows opened wide to let in light and hope. Amelia stood at the original schoolhouse door, watching her students file in for morning lessons. But these weren't just white children anymore. Dakota sat in the front row beside Mary Quinn, their heads bent together over a shared reader. Red Sky's younger sister, Singing Bird, helped little James Morrison with his arithmetic. The integration hadn't been without challenges, but each day brought new understanding. "Good morning, class," Amelia called, and 24 voices responded in unison, some in English, some in Lakota, all in friendship. The federal investigation had been thorough. Crane's documents, delivered safely by Will Henderson to honest marshals, had revealed a network of corruption stretching to the territorial capital. Several officials faced trial. Stolen lands were being returned to the Lakota, including the precious water rights Crane had killed to obtain. Most importantly, a new treaty guaranteed the rights of peaceful coexistence, with both communities having legal standing. But the real changes went deeper than law. Thomas Bradley's forge now employed both white and Lakota workers, crafting tools that both communities needed. Dr. Harrison had taken on Morningstar as an apprentice, learning traditional healing even as he taught modern medicine. Sarah Mitchell's church held services where hymns were sung in 2 languages, and no one thought it strange anymore. After school, Amelia walked to the river, the same black water that had nearly claimed her life. The spring melt had calmed its rage, and wildflowers bloomed along the banks. She often came here to think, to remember, to marvel at how much had changed. She wasn't surprised when Whitehawk appeared beside her, moving with his characteristic silence. They often met here, drawn by shared memory and growing affection. "The council meets tonight," he said without preamble, "to decide on the permanent treaty. Some still argue for separation, for keeping our peoples apart. And you? What do you argue?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the river flow. "I argue for bridges," he said finally. "My brother was right. Separation breeds fear. Fear breeds hate. Only together can we build something lasting." "Together," she repeated, the word carrying weight between them. Over the months, their partnership had deepened into something neither had expected. The warrior who'd saved her from drowning, who'd fought beside her for justice, had become far more than an ally. And she knew from the way he looked at her, the way he found reasons to visit the school, that she wasn't alone in these feelings. "Amelia," he said now, turning to face her, "my people will ask tonight about the future, about whether whites can truly change, truly accept us as equals. What should I tell them? Tell them about Mary Quinn, who refused to eat until Singing Bird was allowed to sit beside her at lunch. Tell them about Seth Morrison, who stands guard at the Lakota camp to prevent any troublemakers. Tell them about this town, imperfect but trying, building something new from the ashes of hate. And tell them about the teacher who started it all, who gave everything for a Lakota child she didn't know." "I gave nothing compared to what I received," she said softly. "I found purpose. I found courage I didn't know I had. I found—" "What?" He stepped closer, his dark eyes intent. "I found you," she whispered. The kiss was gentle, a question more than a statement. When she responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, it became an answer to all the uncertainty, all the differences that should have kept them apart, all the voices that said such love was impossible. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Whitehawk smiled that rare smile that never failed to make her heart race. "My sister has been saying I should speak to you," he admitted. "She says the spirits themselves brought us together, that you were sent to save not just Lakota, but all of us. And what do you say? I say Morningstar thinks too much like a medicine woman, but—" He cupped her face gently. "I also say that when a man finds a woman who matches his courage, who fights for justice, who builds bridges where others see only walls, he would be a fool not to cherish her. Even if she's white, even if both our peoples might object. Especially then, we are the bridge, Amelia. You and I, Lakota and Mary, all of us who choose love over fear. This is how the world changes, one heart at a time." That evening, the whole town gathered for the council meeting. It was held in the open, under stars that watched impartially over red and white alike. Elders from both communities spoke, some still advocating for caution, for maintaining the old boundaries. Then Lakota stood. At 13, he was small for his age, but his voice carried the strength of conviction. "I speak as one who lost everything," he said in clear English, then repeated in Lakota. "Father, brother, home, I should hate all whites, but a white woman saved me, white families hid me, white men fought and died for my freedom." He looked around the circle. "How can I hate when I have seen such love? How can I choose war when brave people chose peace?" Mary Quinn stood beside him. "My PA taught me to fear Indians, said they were savages, but Lakota shared his food when I forgot my lunch. Singing Bird braided my hair when I cried. Mrs. Morningstar healed my mother's fever." Her young voice cracked with emotion. "They ain't savages, they're my friends, my family." One by one, others stood to speak. Thomas Bradley talked about learning metalwork techniques from Lakota craftsmen. Dr. Harrison praised traditional medicines that had saved lives. Even Seth Morrison, shamefaced but determined, spoke about redemption and second chances. Finally, Whitehawk rose. 6 months ago, this town ran red with blood. Hatred ruled, and my people died for white man's greed. I wanted vengeance. I wanted to paint the plains with settler blood as they had painted it with ours." He paused, his eyes finding Amelia's across the fire. "Then I saved a drowning woman, and she saved my soul. She showed me another way. Not the way of forgetting, we must never forget the crimes done, but the way of forgiving, of building, of choosing hope over hate." He held out his hand to Amelia. After only a moment's hesitation, she took it, standing beside him before the assembled communities. "This woman will be my wife," Whitehawk announced, causing gasps from both sides. A white woman and a Lakota warrior, joined not despite our differences, but because of all we've learned from them. We are the living treaty, the bridge made flesh, and our children will belong to both worlds, citizens of the future we build together. The silence stretched, tense with the weight of history and prejudice. Then Morning Star began to sing, a Lakota blessing song for new beginnings. Sarah Mitchell joined with a harmony from her hymnal. Others added their voices, until the night rang with a chorus of two peoples becoming one. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. The Treaty of Coexistence was approved. But more than that, a commitment was made to actively build the integrated community that had already begun to flourish. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Amelia and Whitehawk slipped away to the river. The same black water that had brought them together, that had tried to claim her life, but instead delivered her to a new one. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Your family in Philadelphia, they'll never understand. You'll face hardship, prejudice, dangers I can't always protect you from." "I've already died once for what I believe in," she reminded him. "And you brought me back to life. How could I choose any path but this one?" They were married a month later, in a ceremony that blended traditions. Amelia wore her mother's wedding dress adorned with Lakota beadwork. Whitehawk dressed in his finest buckskins with a white man's wedding band. Dakota served as witness, along with Mary Quinn, their young faces shining with joy for the teacher and warrior who'd shown them a better way. The school expanded, with Morning Star teaching Lakota language and culture alongside Amelia's lessons in English and arithmetic. Trade flourished as trust grew. Cedar Falls became known throughout the territory as a place where impossible things happened, where former enemies worked side by side, where justice meant something more than the strong dominating the weak, where love could bloom across any divide. Years later, when Amelia's hair had silvered and Whitehawk's warrior days were behind him, they would sit by the Blackwater with their children, beautiful souls who moved easily between both worlds, speaking both languages, carrying both heritages with pride. They would tell the story of how hatred nearly destroyed everything, and how love, stubborn, courageous, impossible love, had built something better from the ruins. And always, they would end with the same truth, that bridges between peoples aren't built by governments or treaties, but by individual hearts brave enough to reach across the divide, by teachers who wave at children regardless of their skin color, by warriors who save drowning women, by ordinary people who choose extraordinary love. The Blackwater flowed on, carrying their story downstream to inspire others, to remind the world that even in the darkest places, even against impossible odds, compassion can triumph over cruelty, understanding can defeat ignorance, and love, always love, can conquer hate. For in the end, that's what Amelia Ward had learned in her journey from Philadelphia teacher to frontier legend, that we are all more alike than different, all seeking the same things: safety for our children, justice for our communities, and someone to stand beside us when the river rises and threatens to sweep everything away. And sometimes, if we're very lucky and very brave, we find that someone in the most unexpected place, and together we build a bridge that all the floods of prejudice can never wash away. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you tuning in from today? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this tale of courage, justice, and forbidden love touched your heart, please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Amelia and Whitehawk's journey. What part of their story moved you the most? Let me know in the comments.